Folks, if you're new here, this is the weekly Apologetics Academy webinar that we do every Saturday at 8 p.m. GMT, UK time, or 3 p.m. Eastern, which is 2 p.m. Central, or 12 noon Pacific. And we run this every Saturday. We bring in different scholars and apologists and experts on different topics from the theological spectrum. We bring in Christians as well as Muslims as well as atheists to talk to us about big questions, and we try to explore the big questions of life together in a very non-threatening, non-confrontational and friendly environment. We normally have our guest speaker give a short talk, normally less than an hour to deliver a presentation. And then we open it up for open floor Q&A. And so if you want to express disagreement with the speaker or ask clarifying questions or ask questions that have often bothered you about the topic, then you will be able to submit questions, or you can do that in a number of ways. You are currently anonymous in the audience, and you can participate in a few different ways. You can use the chat box, which you can see, which most of you I think have found by now. Make sure that if you want to submit chat into the chat window, that you should be sent to everyone rather than just panelists. You can also submit a question anonymously using the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen on the menu bar. And that will submit the question to the panelists, and I will ask Mike to address your question. Or if you're feeling brave, you can hit the raise hand button, which then indicates to me that you wish to actually engage with Mike Behe, who is our guest speaker for tonight, using your webcam and microphone. And then you can have a more extended back and forth or dialogue with Mike, expressing your disagreement or you want to ask a particular question, a particular point of your own. This normally a very interesting and informative discussion. So we have 25 people here, which is a very good turnout so far. Mike, do you want to, Mike Behe is our guest speaker for tonight. Do you want to tell us just who you are, Mike, just in case people don't know you?
Hi, folks. Yeah, nice to be with you. I'm here in the Eastern United States at Lehigh University. My name is Mike Behe. I'm currently a professor in the biology department at Lehigh University, but don't blame them for anything I say. I'm a biochemist, and I am a proponent of intelligent design. I used to think Darwinism was true, but then kind of became skeptical of it as time went on. And in 1996, I wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, which made the case for intelligent design from biochemistry. And since that time, I've devoted most of my efforts to exploring intelligent design. So I'm looking forward to chatting with everybody today.
Just for those that haven't been before, our website is www.apologetics-academy.org. I'm just putting that to the chat window. And if you go there and click on online apologetics training, you can find out the upcoming speaker schedule, the upcoming lineup. Next week we have Aaron Ra coming on, who's an atheist. And then I believe the following week we have Cameron McAllister from RZIM, who's going to talk to us about the argument from desire. And I believe the following week, if I'm not mistaken, we have Dr. Michael Brown, who's a well-known biblical scholar, coming to talk to us about messianic prophecy in the Old Testament, which will be fascinating. So do you want to maybe kick us off, Mike, and just
sure.
Your presentation? You can share your screen if you want. If you press the share screen button, you can.
Okay, will do. Okay, folks, I'm going to talk. I'll bet you it's for about 45 minutes, maybe less than that. And what I'm going to do if I can figure it out, is this. This is the title of the talk, The Structure of the Scientific Argument for Intelligent Design. So this is the way I view the structure of the argument. It doesn't go into all the nitty-gritty details of the biochemical systems or stuff like that, but this is the structure of the argument for intelligent design. And it's the scientific argument for design rather than a philosophical argument or a theological argument. And this is, again, the way I see it. So before I start out, I always have a disclaimer, because as you saw in my title slide, it says I'm at Lehigh University, but everybody here, disagrees with me. They are mad at me for various reasons. So don't blame them. These are just my opinions. And the general talk that I'm going to give mirrors an op-ed piece that I wrote way back in the year 2005, so 11 years or so ago, for the New York Times. During that time, there was kind of a dust-up in Kansas over the teaching of evolution, and the Times wanted somebody to explain intelligent design reasoning to their readers and asked me to write a short thing. And so I did this, and this is to kind of make the point that the argument is not hard to understand. If you can explain it in an op-ed piece, then it should be easy to follow. And the argument has 5 different points. So I'm going to list them first, and then we'll go through them individually. The first part of the argument is that design, the conclusion of design, is not something mystical. It's not some, vision that you have. Rather, it's deduced from the physical structure of a system. The second point is that everyone agrees that aspects of biology strongly appear to be designed. And when I say everyone, I mean even those folks who think that the appearance of design is misleading. Nonetheless, everyone does agree that aspects of biology appear to be designed. And of course, the folks who think that appearance is misleading think that they have another explanation for the appearance of design. And the most popular one is, of course, Darwin's theory of evolution. So the third point is to show that there are structural obstacles to Darwinian evolution. There are physical reasons to think that it cannot do what is claimed for it. And the next point is kind of an answer to the fact that whenever we read something in the popular literature about evolution or see a science show on TV, we're pretty much always told that, in fact, science has already explained how all of life could have arisen by Darwinian processes. It's something, the explanation is well in hand. So the fourth point is that those claims, those grand Darwinian claims, rest on undisciplined imagination. In other words, they're urban legends. And I should emphasize that that's the grand Darwinian claims. Modest Darwinian claims or small Darwinian claims are oftentimes very well supported and true. And the fifth point, is going to be a summary point. And it's this: at the bottom line, right now, in the year 2016, we have in hand strong positive evidence for design and little evidence that Darwinism can do what's claimed for it. So that's all the 5 points, a quick summary. So let's start with that first one. Let's ask that design is not mystical. It's deduced from the physical structure of a system. But before we do that, we have to ask ourselves, what the heck is design? What do we mean by design? And if you look in a dictionary, you'll see a lot of definitions for the word design, but the pertinent one is something like this: that design is the purposeful or inventive arrangement of parts or details. And we can shorten that to simply saying that design is the purposeful arrangement of parts. And that means that we infer design, we conclude that design has happened, or at least suspect that design has happened, whenever parts appear to be arranged to accomplish a function. And well, that's a bunch of words, and sometimes it's good to look at an example of this to see what we mean. And an illustration of this is shown in the next slide here. This is a Far Side cartoon. Some of you may have seen these before. They're really great, some of my favorites. And in the cartoon, we've got a troop of jungle explorers. And the lead explorer has been strung up and skewered. And if you see that this guy here turns to this guy here and says, "That's why I never walk in front." And those are words to live by, let me assure you. Now, everyone who looks at this cartoon immediately realizes that this was designed. This was not an accident. This fellow's death was intended. As a matter of fact, the humor of the cartoon depends upon you recognizing that this was designed. It wouldn't be nearly as funny if he just fell over a cliff or something. But how do you know that? How do you know that this trap was designed? Well, you know it's designed because you see a number of parts that are put together to accomplish a function, to accomplish a purpose. In other words, you see the purposeful arrangement of parts. So this is how we conclude design. Notice too that this design uses all natural substances. It's far out away from civilization, all sorts of things. But we still recognize the purposeful design. Okay, so we infer design whenever parts appear arranged to accomplish a function. But we have one more point to make sure we understand before we leave this slide, and that is the strength of our inference, the strength of our confidence that we see design is quantitative. And by that, I just mean that the more and more parts we see, and the more and more closely they are arranged to fit the purpose, then the more and more confident we can be that they were designed. Now, let me give you some illustrations of that concept. Suppose you and a buddy were hiking in the United States, in Idaho, and you come across these mountains. And your buddy turns to you and says, "Where do you think those mountains came from?" And you might say to yourself, "Gee, I wish I had taken that geology course I was going to take." But you'd say something like, "Well, maybe plate tectonics, maybe volcanic activity." And most people would be happy with that. But what if your friend said to you, "Well, yeah, okay, but look, if you if you look at the tallest peak here, and you draw a line from there to the next tallest peak, it makes an angle of about 10 degrees with a horizontal. And of course, you would respond, so what? You know, so what? And, you know, the peak has to be separated from this peak by something, you know, who cares? And most people would agree with you, agree that, you know, what's the big deal? Okay, so you and your buddy continue your trek, and you go hiking in New Hampshire now, and you come by this structure. And this is something called the Old Man of the Mountain, which was a kind of a noted land feature in New Hampshire. These guys on it, they're actually state workers trying to stabilize the structure, which unfortunately fell down a few years ago. And suppose your friend asks you the same question, you know, where do you think this came from? And you might say to yourself, gee whiz, look at that thing. You know, look, this part here looks like a chin, and here's the mouth. Looks like a nose here and a forehead. You know, do you think some prehistoric tribe might have, well, and then you kind of shake yourself and say, nah. You know, it's probably just a lucky arrangement of these rocks. You know, you look at it from a different angle, it doesn't look nearly as much like a face as it does here. And then suppose you and your friend go walking again, and this time you go to South Dakota, and you walk by Mount Rushmore, and your friend asks you the same question. Where do you think these mountains came from? And of course, you immediately would recognize that the faces here were purposely designed. You'd see the other parts of the mountain, and you'd say, oh, well, maybe they just arose by straightforward physical processes. But nobody, even if you'd never heard of Mount Rushmore before, nobody would miss the fact that these 4 images of the presidents were purposely arranged. Now, suppose your friend asks you, well, okay, why is the angle from the top of this rock here down to this one, why does that make an angle of about 20 degrees with the vertical? And now there's an answer to that question. It does so because it's part of the image of George Washington. Now these why questions start to have answers. So that was the point, that design is not mystical, it's deduced from the physical structure of a system. We didn't have a revelation that Mount Rushmore was designed. We deduced it from the physical structure of a system. And we saw not only that, but the confidence of our conclusion of design depends on quantitative factors. The more evidence we have, the more confident we can be. Okay, so now let's go to the second point, that everyone, and I do mean everyone, even those who most stridently disagree that design is real, nonetheless, everyone agrees that aspects of biology appear to be designed. And since we don't have enough time to talk to everyone, we'll let Richard Dawkins stand in for the folks who are skeptical of the conclusion of design itself. And here's a picture of Dawkins from a little while back. And in 1986, 30 years ago, he wrote maybe his most noted book called The Blind Watchmaker. And as you may know, it was a full-throated defense or advocacy of Darwinian evolution, that Darwinism explains the structure of life. Nonetheless, on the very first page of the very first chapter of his book, Defending Darwinism, he wrote the following: "Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. So that's the very definition of biology, according to Richard Dawkins. It's the study of complicated things that appear to have been designed. Well, why does Richard Dawkins think that that biological systems appear to have been designed? Now, he doesn't think they were designed. Nonetheless, why does he even think that they look like they were designed? Is it because of, say, aesthetic reasons? Is it because flowers are so pretty, or baby seals are so cute? No, not according to Richard Dawkins. Biology looks like it was designed not because of aesthetic reasons, according to Dawkins, but because of engineering reasons. He writes a little later in the book, page 21, we may say that a living body or organ is well designed if it has attributes that an intelligent and knowledgeable engineer might have built into it in order to achieve some sensible purpose, such as flying, swimming, seeing. Any engineer can recognize an object that has been designed, even poorly designed, for a purpose. And he can usually work out what that purpose is just by looking at the structure of the object. So what is he saying? He says, we recognize design by the purposeful arrangement of parts. Well, okay, so there's a purposeful arrangement of parts, but is that appearance of design in biology kind of marginal? Is it, you have to squint and look at it from the right angle to think that it was designed? Is it kind of like, maybe the old man of the mountain? Well, no. According to Richard Dawkins, the appearance of design in biology is overpowering. He writes on the same page, natural selection is the blind watchmaker, blind because it does not see ahead, does not plan consequences, has no purpose in view. Yet, the living results of natural selection overwhelmingly impress us with the appearance of design, as if by a master watchmaker, impress us with the illusion of design and planning. So Dawkins thinks that life appears to be designed. He thinks it appears to be designed because of the purposeful arrangement of parts. And he thinks that appearance of design is not marginal or illusory. He thinks it's overpowering. Okay. So that was the point that everyone, exemplified by Richard Dawkins, everyone at least agrees that aspects of biology strongly appear to be designed. But of course, Richard Dawkins and most biologists think that appearance is misleading. They think that, for the most part, most biologists think that Darwin's mechanism of random variation, random mutation, and natural selection can explain that appearance. So my next point then is going to be that there are structural obstacles to Darwinian evolution. There are physical reasons to think that it cannot do what is claimed for it. And this is the argument I made in my book, Darwin's Black Box, 20 or so years ago. And it's kind of based on a problem that Charles Darwin himself realized in The Origin of Species. In that book, Darwin had a little section, well, he had a chapter called Difficulties for the Theory. And one section of that chapter was named Organs of Extreme Perfection and Complication. And in it, he wrote about the eye, the vertebrate eye, and other organs which are impress biologists with their abilities. And he thought that he could explain it to his own satisfaction. But nonetheless, during the writing, he said that if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down, adding, but I can find out no such case. Now, notice here that Darwin was being, rhetorically pretty clever in that he was trying to foist upon his critics an impossible standard of evidence to meet, to demonstrate that something could not possibly have happened. In other words, he said that you have to prove a negative in order to prove him wrong. And that's something which science, not only in biology, but science anywhere, is absolutely incapable of doing. It can never show that something is logically impossible, that something could not possibly have happened. Nonetheless, let's kind of play off this idea of Darwin's and ask ourselves at least, well, what sure doesn't look like it could be formed by numerous successive slight modifications? And then let's ask if there is any evidence that such things could have been. So what kind of a system could not be formed or would have great difficulty being formed by numerous successive slight modifications? And in Darwin's black box, I said that I kind of dubbed some systems that meet this criterion irreducibly complex, or ones that have the property of irreducible complexity. Now, an irreducibly complex system is one that is composed of a number of different pieces. And if you take away one of the pieces, then the whole system fails. So it's irreducible. You can't take one of the pieces, and it's complex because it's got a number of pieces. And the challenge for Darwin's theory is that if it needs a number of pieces in order to work, then natural selection cannot select for its function until all the pieces are already there. Essentially, it has to exist before natural selection acts on it. And again, and this is a phrase, it's good to often see examples of things to kind of grasp what they mean. And as an example of irreducible complexity from our everyday world, in Darwin's black box, I gave an example of an ordinary mouse trap, a mechanical mouse trap that you might buy at a grocery store or hardware store or something like that. Now, as you can see, the mouse trap has a number of different components. The first, most visible thing is that it's got this big wooden base to which everything else is attached. And it's also got this tightly wound spring that has an extended end here and another extended end here to press against the base and also to overlap this other metal part, which is called the hammer, which actually is the part that squashes the mouse. And the hammer has to be pushed back over to here and it has to be stabilized into position until the mouse comes along. And that's the job of something called the holding bar. Once the hammer is over here, the holding bar is draped over it, and the end of the holding bar itself has to be inserted into something called the catch to stabilize it. There are also a number of staples. You see this one here, and this big one over here to stabilize all the pieces on the base. Now, the mousetrap needs all of these parts to work. If you did not have the spring, or you didn't have a holding bar, or you didn't have this staple here or any of the other parts, then it's not like the trap would work half as well as it used to or a quarter as well as it used to. It would be broken. It would not work at all. So this is what I meant by the concept of irreducible complexity. And again, it's hard to see how you could make something like this by something like a Darwinian process. You know, how would you put something like this together? You know, would you start with just the platform and hope to catch mice inefficiently, and then maybe add the pieces one by one or something? But no, you know, the platform itself doesn't catch mice, and adding the other pieces doesn't help improve things. So it's a big problem. It's a conundrum. It's certainly not straightforward how you would form something like this by Darwin's process. So the question is, well, this is, mouse traps are interesting, but is there anything like this in life? And in particular, since the progress of science has shown that the foundation of life is run by cells that are filled with molecular systems, are there any systems at the foundation of life that are irreducibly complex? And the answer is, yeah, the cell is simply chock full of irreducibly complex systems. And I think the most visually striking example is this one, which I talk about in the book as well. This is called the bacterial flagellum. And it quite literally is an outboard motor that helps cells to swim, allows cells to swim. As you can see, it's got a number of different components. So this is a drawing of the flagellum taken from a biochemistry textbook by Voet and Voet, which is widely used in the United States. And the flagellum has a number of parts. There's this long tail-like thing which actually acts as a propeller. It's rotated around and around and around, so it whips and pushes against the water and therefore pushes the bacterium to which it's attached forward. The propeller itself is attached to something called the drive shaft through an attachment piece called the hook region, which acts as something called a universal joint, which kind of translate the rotational motion of the drive shaft in this plane to rotational motion of the propeller in this plane. And they are attached to, like I said, the drive shaft, which is itself attached to the rotor. The rotor uses a flow of acid, flow of protons from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell to power the turning of the motor. It's actually a rotary motor. It's kind of like water flowing over a dam that powers a turbine when it hits it below. The whole apparatus has to be held stationary in the membrane while it's turning, and that's the job of some other protein parts that make up a feature called the stator. It's kind of like the clamps that hold an outboard motor onto a boat. The drive shaft has to poke up through the bacterial membrane, and there are some other parts, protein parts, which act as bushing material, kind of to allow that through the membrane and seal it off. Now, if you look at this, it's easy to see that this is irreducibly complex, like a mousetrap. If the propeller were gone, if the drive shaft were gone, if the motor were gone, if any of many different parts of the flagellum were missing, the machine would not work half as well as it used to, or a quarter as well as it used to. It would be broken, like a mousetrap missing a spring, or a mousetrap missing a holding bar. So much like the mousetrap, this the evolutionary construction of something like this by numerous successive slight modifications in a Darwinian fashion is very difficult to see. Now, I like to show people this drawing of the flagellum because most people, when they see it, immediately realize that this is a machine. This is not like a machine. It's not analogous to a machine. This is a real physical machine. And since we know what it takes to make machines, perhaps this can give us a clue as to the origin of something like the bacterial flagellum. Okay, you might ask yourself, well, is this flagellum thing, is this like a freak of nature? I mean, do we see this thing and there's nothing else like this around? And the answer is no. We've learned that the cell, the more we know, the more we see that the cell is chock full of molecular machinery. As a matter of fact, in the year 1998, the journal Cell issued a special issue on the topic of molecular machines. And here down in the lower left corner, there's something that vaguely resembles a watch. Maybe the artist had in mind Paley's watch. And if you turn the cover of this issue of the journal and you look at the table of contents, you see articles that have the titles, "The Cell as a Collection of Protein Machines," "Polymerases and the Replisome," "Machines Within Machines," "Mechanical Devices of the Spliceosome," "Motors, Clocks, Springs, and Things." So the cell is just chock full of machinery. And machinery, if even a simple mousetrap is irreducibly complex and difficult to see how it could be produced by a gradual process such as Darwin envisioned, then all complex machinery is like that. And the cell is filled with such machinery. So that was the point, that there are structural obstacles to Darwinian evolution. There's a number of obstacles, but one in particular is this idea of irreducible complexity. But you might say to yourself, aren't we told over and over again in newspaper stories and in stories on science in magazines and on TV that science already knows that Darwinian processes explain life? Well, yes, we are told that, but it turns out that those grand Darwinian claims rest on imagination. Now, imagination can be a good thing in science, as it can in many other disciplines, but when it becomes disconnected from evidence, when it kind of goes off on its own, then it turns into a two-edged sword, and it can cause us problems. And in order to support this point, I'm going to rely just on one fellow, a guy named Franklin Harold, who was a prominent microbiologist. He's retired from the Colorado State University at Boulder for a number of years now. But in 2001, he wrote a book called The Way of the Cell, which was published by Oxford University Press, of course, a very prestigious academic publishing house. And in it, he was puzzling over how to explain where the cell came from. And during his discussions, he kind of touched on the topic of intelligent design briefly. And he wrote the following. He said, "We should reject, as a matter of principle, the substitution of intelligent design for the dialogue of chance and necessity." And he referenced my book. "But," he said, "we must concede that there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical system. only a variety of wishful speculations. Only a variety of wishful speculations. Well, this is interesting. He makes 2 points here, and let me take them, dwell on them for a minute, and I'm going to take them in reverse order. He says that we don't have detailed Darwinian accounts, only a variety of wishful speculations. You know, kind of like the Just So stories, that the book that was written by Rudyard Kipling over a century ago. I'm sure you've heard about them, you know, how the tiger got its stripes, how the rhinoceros got its horn, you know, how the bacterium got its flagellum. You know, it's kind of amusing to think of it in that context, but if you think of it for a little longer, it's really astonishing that a theory that has been so fruitless at accounting for the origins of the machinery of the cell is nonetheless so popular in scientific circles. The other point that Franklin Harold made is that we should reject intelligent design as a matter of principle, not as a matter of evidence, as a matter of principle. So apparently we are forbidden to entertain the idea of design. But why is that? Now, why are we forbidden? What is this principle? You know, we saw the drawing of the flagellum a few slides ago. Now, design was not something that was hard to see. It kind of pops right out at you. So it's not a strange concept to think about. But nonetheless, Professor Harold thinks that we should reject it out of hand. So what principle is that? As a matter of principle, what principle? Well, it turns out he doesn't say. He just wrote what I put up on the slide there and then continued on to other things. Nonetheless, I think I know what principle Franklin Harold had in mind, and that's shown on the next slide here. And the principle is this, that intelligent design seems to point strongly beyond nature. It seems to have philosophical, maybe even theological overtones. And that makes a lot of people nervous, including many scientists. And they think that a theory that has such strong extra scientific implications should be kept far away from science. Well, I understand what they're saying, but I disagree with them. I was always told that science is supposed to follow the evidence wherever it leads. It's not our job to worry about the philosophical implications. And I thought that was good advice when I first heard it, and I continue to think it's good advice. So that was the point, that grand Darwinian claims rest on undisciplined imagination. And so the summary, the fifth point, is that the bottom line is this, that we have in hand, and in the present day, strong evidence for design, strong positive evidence for design, and little evidence for Darwinism. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, we just saw that there's little evidence for Darwinism, as Franklin Harold said. But remind me again, what is this strong positive evidence for design? And the strong positive evidence for design is exactly what Richard Dawkins wrote of in The Blind Watchmaker, that life overwhelmingly impresses us with the appearance of design. That is exactly how we come to a conclusion of design, when we see a purposeful arrangement of parts. The purposeful arrangement of parts is the evidence for design. And as I said, the more and more science has investigated it, the more and more strongly that appearance, the stronger and stronger that appearance has become. Okay, so what kind of an argument is this that say Dawkins is making, and that I agree with, that when you see something repeated, such as when we see a purposeful arrangement of parts, and we always find that intelligence was required to put the parts together, purposeful design, then when we see a purposeful arrangement of parts in life, we are justified in thinking that that too required design. What's just the nature? What's the nature of that kind of an argument? And the kind of colloquial kind of argument that it is shown on this next slide here. So you look at that and you say to yourself, what is that? What is that? Let me think. And then you think, or not explicitly, but you immediately say to yourself, well, if it looks like a duck, and if it walks like a duck, and if it quacks like a duck, then I am justified in thinking that that, in fact, is a duck. When we see something repeatedly with the same attributes, and if we understand why it has those attributes, then we are justified in thinking the next thing that comes along with those attributes is a member of that class. And as a matter of fact, you know, this might sound silly. This is, like I said, the colloquial version of this argument, but philosophers actually know that this type of reasoning is one of the two major classes of reasoning that we use all the time. And they even have a special term for it. They call it an inductive argument, you see. Haha, that's a joke. Well, okay, so philosophers and inductive argument. So are we talking about philosophy or what? I thought we were talking about science. Well, if you look up the term inductive argument or inductive reasoning, you'll find something like this. Inductive reasoning. When a person uses a number of established facts to draw a general conclusion, he uses inductive reasoning. This is the kind of logic normally used in the sciences. The argument for design is a scientific argument. It is not a theological argument. It is based on empirical, physical evidence, the arrangement of the parts of the physical systems that science has discovered in life, along with the normal modes of logic that science uses all the time. And so the conclusion is of this talk is simply that intelligent design is rationally justified. Again, it's not esoteric. It's not an argument based on any other types of reasoning than science normally uses all the time. Okay, I see I've gone for about 40 to 45 minutes. So what I'm going to do is end her there. And Jonathan, I'm all set for the next part.
Great. Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Oh, okay. I will do that.
Okay. We had a hand just there from Brian. He's taking it down. Brian, if you want to ask questions, put your hand back up so that indicates to me that you want to speak. We have just a few questions in the Q&A forum. Just so folks know how this works, if you joined us after I gave the introduction spiel at the start, if you would like to interact directly with Mike and ask questions and raise objections or make comments or whatever using your video and audio, then you can raise your hand and I will make you live with Mike to be a co-panelist and dialogue with him. Or you can submit questions anonymously with the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen as well. So let me just look at some of the Q&A that's been submitted. John says, I saw this on Wikipedia, and he quotes, the idea that seemingly irreducibly complex systems cannot evolve has been refuted through evolutionary mechanisms such as acceptation, the adaptation of organs for entirely new functions, and the use of scaffolding, which are initially necessary features of a system that later degenerate when they are no longer required. Potential evolutionary pathways have been provided for all of the systems Behe used as examples of irreducible complexity, end quote. Care to comment? What do you think, Mike?
Well, I disagree for all of those examples that were cited. I can go back for each one. You listed a number one, and frankly, as I get older, I don't remember as well as I used to. But let's just take scaffolding. Scaffolding, in our experience, presupposes the system that it's intended to design. If you look at the scaffolding for, say, a building where say an office building is being constructed, that has the final structure in view. So it's hard to see how something that requires even more to construct it than what is found in the final structure would be an argument against intelligent design. Many of the things that you find on Wikipedia, they're partisan. They will put forth an argument as if it were the final word, but I have responded to pretty much all of those examples. And if you go to the Discovery Institute website and look at some of my replies, I'd be happy to go into the nitty-gritty of particular examples with you. But in my experience, the responses pretty much paper over problems. They leap from structure to structure in their minds and don't really deal with the details as science really should. Let's take the case of acceptation. Acceptation is a nice word, but just kind of using acceptation as a magic wand to say this is the problem, say that the problem goes away, it is not an explanation. First of all, if you're accepting something, then you haven't explained what the starting thing was. You're just saying it was there, and we're going to use it for something else. And in my experience, people who say that this was the result of acceptation leave it at that, and they don't explain the starting point, and they don't explain the steps then that would be necessary to be taken from one structure to the other. So let me just say I've read all of those articles too that the questioner cites, and I don't find them to be answers to the problem at all.
Great, thank you, Mike. We have another 5 questions still submitted in the Q&A, but we also have a hand raised, so let me go to our hand. It is biologist Zachary Moore from Texas. Hey, Zachary.
Hi, Jonathan. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine. We can see
All
you.
right, excellent.
Go ahead.
So, Dr. Behe, I was wondering how you control for type 1 and type 2 errors when you're making design inferences in the biological spectrum.
Well, why don't you tell me what type 1 and type 2 errors are?
Oh, sorry. So type 1 errors are false positives, type 2 are false negatives.
Type 2s generally don't bother me. If somebody designs something and you cannot detect that it was designed, well, that just means there's more design in life than we can detect, and that's not a problem. it's certainly true that a designer can fashion something that we would not be able to detect was designed. I mean, in my office at Lehigh, at least the office I used to have, you could look out on a courtyard that had modern sculptures in it, and I would have never guessed that any of those were designed, but apparently they were. The second, the type 1 error, you say, is a false positive. That is, you think that there is something designed which was not designed. In my experience, the more we know of nature and the more that we see at the molecular level of life, the less and less that has become a problem. And I'm not sure of any, perhaps you can give me an example of a false positive, because I'm not aware of any right now.
Well, one way that we could determine that would be to put forward a positive control. That we could sort of compare the positive control signal of design that we get and compare that to any other similar positive results that we might get from the design inference. So maybe a better way of answering the question would be for you to say, what is a very clear positive control of design, intelligent design, or some sort of a supernatural design that we all can agree on? Because as you know, in biology, it's very important to have our controls before we engage in any sort of experimentation or inference. So in order to make an inference sort of with a high degree of certainty and comfort, we need to have a very clear positive control. So maybe you could just sort of give us whatever that positive control is for design.
Well, sure. I'm sure we could go to some of the examples that Richard Dawkins, cited in his book. We can go with the vertebrate eye, that is a classic. We can go to the flagellum, which he talked about in later books after me. So those are, I think,
so those would be,
everybody can agree that those are very strongly appear to be designed.
Well, okay, so there's a distinction though, apparent design versus actual design. I'm asking, what is a positive control for actual design?
Well, as I said, we perceive design by the purposeful arrangement of parts, and so our control for design is our perception of the design, the purposeful arrangement. And I think we can, of course, if you have somebody, if you have a person who claims to be able to explain design, but says that his mechanism either doesn't work now or would take too long to demonstrate, but he's sure that it would work over time, that's essentially an unfalsifiable position. But nonetheless, as I tried to say in the talk, we deduce design from the purposeful arrangement of parts. Everybody agrees that this is the way we conclude design. There is no positive evidence to show that any other factor could account for this, and therefore we are justified in concluding that it was designed.
So are you saying then that there is no positive control for supernatural design that we have access to?
Well, if you notice, I never said the word supernatural. You keep repeating that. I said design. We recognize design in the purposeful arrangement of parts. It's kind of like you think of the duck, the silly duck. Here is a duck, and the way I perceive your question is you're saying to me, what is the positive control that is really a duck? You say, well, it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck. We know ducks come from other ducks. And you're saying, yeah, but what's really the positive control? And that is it. It has all the characteristics of a duck. And we're in our unbroken experience, we know that that is what ducks are like.
But something that was specially created as a duck, right? So we would need to, in order.
I don't think I said the phrase specially created. I think I just said we know that there's a purposeful arrangement of parts. As a matter of fact, with Mount Rushmore, with mousetraps, and so on, if they were suppose they were specially created. Suppose that in the next room, God ex nihilo made a mousetrap, and you didn't know that. And you and I walked into the next room together, and I said, look at that mousetrap there. Do you think that was designed? You'd say, well, of course we know that such a thing was designed. You would conclude that it was designed not because you knew the history of the system. You'd conclude it was designed because you saw how the parts were arranged to each other. And in our experience, nothing arranges parts purposefully except a mind.
Right. So in that sense, in that situation, I'd be justified in concluding that it was human design, but certainly not supernatural, as you were saying, God ex nihilo.
Well, let me just point out, I know folks who are skeptical of ID often conflate them, but in my talk, I never said human or design versus divine design. I never said specially created.
Sure.
I never said anything like that. I said, this is how we recognize design.
And all those ways are examples of human design. Everything that you gave us were very positive examples of human design, but not anything else. So should we conclude?
Well, how do you know that? I showed you that example of a Far Side cartoon. Now, suppose I talked to the artist who drew that cartoon, and he says, oh, I didn't mean that they were jungle explorers. I meant them to represent space explorers, and they were walking around in a jungle on another world, and they came across this thing. Would you then say, oh, this wasn't designed because there weren't any humans in the vicinity? Suppose you came across another world.
Yes, I would. Yeah.
Suppose you came across, well, then we can up the ante. We can say, suppose you came across another world that had never been visited by humans and you found a mousetrap. Would you say that was an accidental arrangement of parts then?
I would assume that there's some creature like us. The only thing I can infer from are the positive examples that we have access to, right? So we're always inferring from human design. The problem is I don't know what a non-human design looks like. All
right, here's another science fiction example. Suppose you went to, well, not a science fiction example. Hundreds of years ago, and people didn't know whether the natives of other lands were human or intelligent or not. Folks in Africa, folks in Australia, the natives there. Now, suppose explorers went to Australia. You were an explorer. You went to Australia, and you came across creatures that looked strange. They were sort of like humans, but they had different, their features were different and so on. How would you know if they were intelligent or not? How would you know? Suppose they, suppose they were just standing there. Would you know that they were intelligent? Suppose they kind of walked around and they kicked some stones. Would that mean they were intelligent? Well, suppose they went and they rearranged some vines and they made a mousetrap or a trap of some sort. Would you then know they were intelligent? Yes, that's how you would know they were intelligent, because they did intelligent things. Or the artifacts that they made were purposeful arrangements of parts.
Right, and that's my point, is that the only thing we're inferring from is from our own human experience. So we're inferring a human design. We're reasonable in concluding human design from a purposeful arrangement of parts, but nothing more grand than that, I think. Unless there's some other positive control that you can present.
You are the one who is restricting the system beyond the evidence for it.
No, just beyond the controls, like a scientist should.
I don't think that's a control. You don't have a control for human design.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Can you show me something that could not have been designed by a non-human, an intelligent non-human?
Something that could not have been designed by a non-human.
Yeah. Suppose we showed you that mousetrap
Mm-hmm.
and it was in fact actually made by whatever being you want to postulate, an angel, a new age force, something that had purpose, but whimsically decided to make a mousetrap, and you went into a room. What is your positive control that that must have been made by a human, that it couldn't have been made by something else?
Well, so the positive control, and again, this goes back to type 1 error, right? False positives. But the positive control that I have is a human being creating something like a mousetrap. So unless I'm able to see this angelic creature making something that a human could not make, then it's not reasonable to conclude that something other than a human could have made this.
Well, no. Again, I think the Australia example kind of speaks to that. If you saw something non-human, suppose you saw a dog. Suppose you saw machinery on a planet that was inhabited by dogs, and you didn't see them doing anything. What would you conclude that they were intelligent, or would you conclude that
I would probably conclude that there were some human-like creatures that had visited the planet and left these machines.
What do you mean by human-like?
Well, again, the only creatures that we know of that design things as machines are humans, right? So that's the only thing.
So dogs can't, or alien dogs or aliens couldn't?
Again,
dogs couldn't?
As you were saying in your talk, we have to approach this inductively, like scientists, right? So I have to see an example of this before I can say that a dog can put together a machine.
So only if you saw it visually.
Or had some evidence of it.
Huh?
Or had some empirical evidence.
Okay, suppose that there was a human, an advanced human, who learned how to program a dog's mind. And the dog was stupid as all get out, but he could program it and have the dog construct a machine. Now you come along the scene and you see this dog constructing a mousetrap or something. Do you conclude that the dog is the source of the intelligence? You see it yourself.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Okay, so that would be a false positive.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So then that goes back to my original question. How do we control for this error? Because right now we don't have any empirical examples or a positive control of non-human supernatural.
It wasn't an error. Your conclusion was an error that the dog was the designer. My conclusion that the mousetrap required design would not have been an error in that situation, because the person programming the dog's mind would be the source of intelligence. In the same way, I conclude that the molecular machinery was designed. I don't conclude who is the designer. You're the one that's trying to limit the conclusion without evidence to a restricted class of potential intelligent agent.
No, I'm trying to understand what the type 1 and type 2 error rates would be, because unless we have a good understanding of what these error rates are, we're not really justified in thinking that our conclusions are.
All right, do you mind if I turn the tables? And let me ask you this. What is the estimated error rate at concluding that molecular machines were the result of a Darwinian process?
I don't know.
Well, then how can we conclude that they were? Many people do.
Maybe we don't. And I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Okay, so you're an agnostic, I guess.
Well, I mean, for the purpose of this conversation, it doesn't really matter to me. And
okay, well, I'm just trying to be, I'm not a logician. I'm not trying to chop logic or things like that. I'm just trying to say, this is a reasonable, rationally justified conclusion that these things were purposely designed.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Nice to talk to you.
You too.
Okay, Jonathan.
Thank you, Zachary. Our friend Blake had his hand raised. You're good to go, Blake. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so the philosopher in me wants to kind of analyze what Zach was just bringing up, and I think this is relevant to, in induction, what's called the generalization problem. So you could have, I mean, I feel like Zach is arbitrarily picking out human in our reference class. So he could have done it this way too. Every time that we've seen something designed, it's been designed by something that is less than 20 feet tall. It's been designed by something that has been walking on the planet of Earth for most of its life. So Zach, why not not just say human, but it has to have all these other characteristics alongside of it. And very quickly, it becomes arbitrary. Like what properties are relevant to the reference class that you're picking out? And I think Dr. Behe was on the right track. I mean, if you run that and you decide to arbitrarily pick out human, then I don't think that you can recognize design in alien civilizations. So if we're think of the movie Independence Day, and we have these huge metal discs flying above us, blowing up these like very strategic locations, you're not allowed to conclude design at that point because it's not humans that are doing it. So how do you conclude design if you don't have your control group or whatever you want?
Zachary, you're still on. You want to go ahead?
Oh, so this is a question for me.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we, again, what I was mentioning to Dr. Behe, the only inference that we could make would be an inference from human design, right? So if we see Independence Day, spaceships flying, if it appears to be something non-natural, the only thing that we can conclude it to be is something within our human frame of reference. And I think that's actually a problem. That's actually a problem within science fiction, that everything that is shown in science fiction context is all too human, far too human. I think if there is alien intelligence, I think it will be so far distinct from what human design is like that we probably won't recognize it as actually designed.
Well, that's interesting. If I could jump in, that's actually your your type 2 errors. I think the false negative, that these super smart aliens might do things that we don't recognize as designed, and I certainly agree with that. But if the super smart aliens did things we didn't even comprehend, we couldn't tell they were designed, but if the super smart aliens made a mousetrap or things that we knew how they worked and recognized what they are, then we could say that those things were designed, and we could say that the source of those things was intelligent.
But only because we have a human reference point.
Well, certainly we have experience with what we have. We need experience. If we were born, yesterday or something like that, we wouldn't be able to say much of anything. But we know how machines are made. It's an inductive reference. We know how complex functional systems are put together and what it takes to put them together. We didn't wait until we discovered what was in the cell and said, oh, look, that's designed. Rather, we knew about machinery, we knew about all sorts of things, and now we find such things in the cell. So we're making the induction from what we know to what we're discovering.
And what we know is human design. That's my point.
Can I jump in real quick just to follow up on the point, if what you're saying is true, Zach? So imagine we see these objects often, coming from Andromeda. So we know it's not human. They hover over Earth, okay? They're over the White House. They're right over New York City. They're very strategically placed at these important points on the world. They're just metal objects. We see that they're floating and they're over these, and then they shoot down and explode these exact areas. Can you conclude design at that point?
Yeah, well, by inferring from what we know about human design. Yeah.
How do you make that inference?
Right.
Can you spell that out a little bit?
Because what we see is some object flying around. We know that humans make objects that fly around, and intentionally we infer from human weapons. We know that, if we see some explosion, we see something come down. That's very similar to humans dropping a bomb. All the language that we use to describe these aliens in these movies is all inferring from human design, our own experience. We can't go beyond that.
So to me, this is a bit of a word game. I think you can just take the word human off. I think you're arbitrarily putting that on there, just like you could arbitrarily put on below 40 feet tall.
No, I don't think so.
Can I try a different tack maybe? Just, you know, as Rudolph, or no, Blake, I'm sorry, as Blake was saying, you know, it's the problem of induction is always a long-standing one, and got all sorts of philosophical puzzles and stuff. But here, let me try something else. We on Earth, people in the 1700s and 1800s would see cannonballs flying and then exploding, artillery shells, fireworks and something. And then in the middle of the 20th century, astronomers saw the redshifts of galaxies, and they inferred that the galaxies were moving away from each other as if in the aftermath of a giant explosion. And yet, we had only seen earthly explosions before, and yet these astronomers were inferring to the whole universe exploding. In your view, is that legitimate to extrapolate from our earthly experience to something very far beyond it for the whole universe?
Well, it's not exactly an explosion; it's an expansion.
Yeah, I know, but nonetheless, it was it was likened to that at least.
Right, and that's so. If the laws of physics are consistent throughout the galaxy, throughout the universe, then yes, it is.
Okay, well, the laws of physics are kind of a subset of reasoning and rationality, and there are other ways to reason as well. So if you can reason from one to the other, then you should be able to reason from our experience here to things beyond our experience.
I'm just going to throw one last thought out, and then I'll exit. I was just going to say, though, going back to the aliens point, you keep wanting to put human in front of it. That's fine if you want to call it human design, but at the end of the day, human design being the reference point doesn't exclude us from recognizing alien design when it happens. And you granted that because you acknowledged that if we saw these disks coming from the Andromeda galaxy that we know aren't human, on the basis of our recognition of human design, we can recognize design simplicator. So that's all we need. Just because we can recognize human design like the outboard motor, and that allows us to recognize design simplicator, and so we can come to the design conclusion in biology just the same way that we can come to the design conclusion in the case of Independence Day. That's my thought.
Sure. And again, all this is in the context of natural functions, right? So natural phenomena. What I'm still looking for is something that is supernatural. I haven't seen that yet.
Well, again, yeah, that's because nobody but yourself has mentioned that word. We're just talking about intelligence and design. Yeah, a case could be made that intelligence is beyond nature, but I'm not making that here. I'm just trying to argue to design. And here's something else. I've read science fiction novels and seen fiction on TV where space aliens come and plant life on Earth and design life on Earth. So if I said to you, maybe the designer of these things were human-like aliens, would you then say that this was a legitimate or possibly correct inference?
Well, again, we would still need to see what the alien design looks like. I would need to see that. We need that positive control.
Okay, so science cannot conclude something unless it sees it.
Well, unless there's evidence of it in some way, unless we can get some sort of a
there's evidence.
record.
You're insisting on visual confirmation of
No. But some record, like is there alien DNA that we have access to that did this or that left a marker of this or anything really?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
That's all I'm looking for.
Okay. Are you finished, Zachary, or do you have more?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, great. How do we bring up someone else or put you back in the audience just now? Okay, we have currently 3 hands raised. Let's go over to, I believe it's Salvador, if I'm not mistaken. There he is. Are you there, Salvador? Hello?
Hello, this is Salvador.
You're on.
Wow.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Dr. Behe, it's a pleasure.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
I'm an intelligent design proponent. I'm currently a graduate student at the National Institutes of Health.
Oh, great.
And
I did my postdoc there. Hey.
so you inspired me to study science and go back and start studying biology. So I really wanted to thank you for all your inspiration.
Terrific.
I wanted to just ask, were you aware that some of the textbooks in biology use phrases from your Darwin's black box? You used the word Rube Goldberg machines,
Uh-huh.
not just irreducible complex, but there are biology textbooks now that describe molecular biology in terms of Rube Goldberg. I have a citation, and then also the Nobel Prize winner 2015, Aziz Sankar. He wrote a paper in 2008, Intelligent Clocks and Rube Goldberg Clocks. He used the word Rube Goldberg-esque designs to describe eukaryotic biological clocks. I just had to tell you that personally. I don't know if you're aware of it, but that was very heartwarming to see.
Yeah, it is. I think that intelligent design has been making a much bigger impact than people are willing to admit. That, yeah, in biology textbooks, high school and college, they try to address intelligent design criticisms without giving intelligent design much room to respond. And you see catchphrases in a lot of different places, but the rule, it's kind of like the code of omerta in the mafia, that you can't admit anything. My favorite indication of the reach of intelligent design was when the prominent evolutionary biologist John Maynard Smith died. When was it? 5-10 years ago, and papers for his obituary ran a picture of him in his office, and it showed his bookshelf as well, and there was a copy of Darwin's Black Box on his bookshelf, and that warmed my heart to no end too. So yeah, thanks thanks very much.
Well, thank you.
Hey, Salvador.
Yes.
Salvador, this is Bill Cole. Cole WD.
Oh, hi. Pleasure.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
I don't want to.
Finally met
Michael, I don't want to. Yeah, we've had some very fun discussions.
Do you have a question, Bill? Your hand was raised.
Yeah, I've got a question, and I'd love Salvador to be part of this also.
Sure.
I have tremendous respect for both these guys. First, Michael, common descent. You have said that you believe in common descent, but I sort of find this to be very confusing subject, because I believe the origin of common descent included a mechanism, that mechanism being random mutation, natural selection, which is now being expanded by the evolutionary biologists to neutral theory, horizontal gene transfer, all these other, alternative splicing, all these other possibilities. So I would say that I do believe what you say, which is there's biochemical evidence for common biochemistry among all living organisms, but without a mechanism, is there really common descent? Because I would say you believe that, if I interpret what you believe properly, is that you believe that there's common descent, but there's design involvement in that change.
Yeah, well, that's a tricky question. I think the evidence for common descent is strong in the similarities between species and the higher categories of biology. The big problem is explaining their differences. If you say that common descent is true, you've at one fell swoop explained the similarities, and now your job is to explain the differences, and that's where design is necessary. I don't think you need to say that. I don't think that you need to really say there's a mechanism involved in design, at least beyond the initial start of the universe. I've written a chapter in my second book, The Edge of Evolution, saying what I think is logically possible that could have happened. That is, the entire universe could have been set up to unfold, to yield purposefully designed systems from the beginning, kind of like a really very, very sharp pool shot by a grand pool billiards master. That there is no, if you think of a trick pool shot, there is no mechanism, there's no law to explain how all the balls go in the pocket. There's just a calculation and the initial conditions where the placement of the balls initially and their speed initially and so on is critical to the shot, but there's no particular mechanism. I wrote in The Edge of Evolution that it's logically possible that the universe could have been set up that way, and that it just unfolded over time. It's not due to anything random, any random mutation plus selection, but it's due to the purposeful unfolding of information that was already present from the beginning. And frankly, I know this is of interest to many people, the idea of common descent and the limits of Darwin's mechanism and so on. But in my mind, that topic is secondary. The question is, where did all this neat, intricate machinery of life come from? Could it really have been produced by random processes plus selection, or was intelligence required? So I grant everything else for the purposes of argument and try to focus on that question.
Yeah, I had I had sent a paper. I think I've sent it to Salvador on alternative splicing that was done and I actually had a discussion with Larry Moran on this subject. That it's actually quite interesting that the alternative splicing sequences between chimps and man are the biggest divergence according to this paper of all vertebrates, and that humans are 70 to 90% alternatively spliced, and half of that for chimps. So this is a remarkable biochemical difference. And I don't think we know where these splicing codes come from. Salvador, maybe you do or have a better idea, but I don't have any papers that can tell me where these splicing codes come from. But and I also sent this paper to James Shapiro. He then responded with another paper about that he agreed with the paper, and he came back with another paper he sent me that I had to pay for, by the way. It was paywalled. Was about this paper was about timing expression, epigenetic expression of DNA timing, and this showed 50% difference between us and chimps. So I'm looking at all this going, this what we've always assumed to be a common descent looks nothing like a common descent to me. As I said to Alan Miller on the blog this morning, Alan, this looks like a separate tree to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, you may be right. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of difficulties, and I hate to be kind of a kind of a party pooper, but that's an area I try to avoid. I actively try to avoid, because you can kind of go down the rabbit hole on questions of, well, what does this mean? What does the other thing mean? And there is no easy way to say that, such and such could not have resulted from common descent or must have been excluded. But if you focus on the question of design, then you can argue about the very structure of the system that's in front of you, or that's pictured in the textbook. You don't have to worry about the history so much of the organisms. Like I said in my talk, we perceive it from the purposeful arrangement of parts, and the question boils down to, can random processes produce this complex system? And that's kind of the thing that I stick to.
Yeah, and I think you did a very good job there. What I see, because Salvador and I are active bloggers, what we see in the argument side is the attempt to create a straw man. It's what I saw Ken Miller do to you years ago. He would create a straw man argument that you said this never could happen, and then he would argue against that straw man. It took me a while before I figured out that's what he was doing, but in the case Zachary is saying, where's the designer? Well, that's not your argument. Your argument is simply evidence for design. Once he asks for a designer, he's creating a straw man to your argument. But I think the legitimate debate on the intelligent design argument is, you say, okay, it's intelligently designed. What's the mechanism? Where do we go? Where do we go from here? And and I think Zachary's making a legitimate complaint, but it's not your argument.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's not that these other questions aren't interesting. The question of common descent is very interesting. The question of the identity of the designer is very interesting. But the basic question is, was there or was there not design? That's the basic question, and you've got to answer that first before you answer other things. It's entirely possible that the other interesting questions will be very difficult to answer. Consider that, say that the statues on Easter Island, when explorers first saw them, they immediately knew that they were designed. But the interesting questions of who made these, and how did they make them, and where did they come from, and all sorts of related questions took centuries to answer. In physics, the question of things like gravity. Newton postulated the law of gravity a long time ago, but what the heck gravity is, where it comes from, and so on, we still are unsure of. So you have to decide which is the basic question and attack that, and try to ignore the interesting but maybe non-productive side issues until things progress, if they ever do, progress enough for us to make progress on those. At least that's my point of view.
Great. Well, I'd like to leave it to somebody else to have questions, so I'll step away.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Let's see. We have one hand raised currently, and we also have 9 questions in the Q&A box. Let me bring up Brian. Hey, Brian.
Oh, hi. Glad to be here, and thank you for your talk, Dr. Behe. I've read your book, and very great materials there.
Thank you.
Appreciate that a lot. One little thing I was going to say to Zach is that he was saying, how do we know a supernatural hypothesis? Well, there were no humans to design the animals before, and Darwinism and idea and creation science all agree that there were no humans before, no humans before animals. and so there's not really possible to be a human hypothesis for design, I think. So that's one answer to his question. One thing I was going to ask you is that you talked a little bit about how secular scientists don't want to consider design hypotheses since it might lead to supernatural conclusions. Why don't many secular scientists understand that methodological naturalism meets the criteria of an a priori fallacy? And do you think this chokehold on science is weakening some? That's one question.
Well, I guess the answer is I don't know. I don't know why they don't realize that methodological naturalism is an a priori commitment. Well, most scientists don't realize that. They, like me, before I got interested in this area, just kind of go with the flow, and you kind of imbibe your attitudes unconsciously in science, as with most other areas of life. Some people who actively think about it say that, well, it's a necessary condition for making progress in science. Otherwise, you'll be attributing everything to something supernatural. And I think that's wrong on both counts. First of all, science, of course, made a lot of progress well before methodological naturalism kind of insinuated itself into science.
Yeah.
And let's see, what was I going to say? I think the danger of ascribing random phenomena just to the supernatural is, ridiculous, overblown. Nobody's going to do that, certainly these days. The reason we conclude design is not because we don't know how to explain the machinery of the cell and the flagellum and so on. It's because we do know what the flagellum looks like, and we realize what it takes to make machinery. So it's from our knowledge that we make an inference to design, not from not just willy-nilly ascribing it to intelligence because we don't know what's going on. And go ahead.
It seems like almost 100% of the evidence or inferences point to design in terms of the cell and many biochemical processes, I would think. And,
I agree with you. I mean, it's, when you look at it and you admit or you allow for the possibility of design, it seems to me that the evidence, the physical evidence for design is really, undeniable. But it shows you, as you say, that shows the power of assumptions or presumptions. If you say at the beginning that there cannot have been design, something else must have occurred. We rule it out a priori, then there's nothing that could convince you of design, no matter how long, even if there, say an angel appeared and said, okay, I'm going to make myself a mousetrap here, and you viewed it with your own eyes as Zach earlier said was the ideal way to conclude it, you might be imagining things. You might, the angel might have been dressed up, a human dressed up. You can find all sorts of ways around it.
They always say that you can't decide which is correct if it's a supernatural explanation, but we have many theistic ones. There's the Christian one, there's the Buddhist one, there's the Muslim one. Each of them make different predictions, and we can just check each prediction, I think.
Yeah, well, that's beyond my expertise there. I'm a plain old biochemist, and I try to stick with that.
Another thing also would be, I think that if you have this methodological naturalism, then universal common descent is not falsifiable, because you always have to end up with materialism in some way. Well,
that may be true, but that's why I avoid that. I stick with the argument for design. Try not to get involved with the argument about descent.
Okay. One more question. I like ID, but I also think that creation science has far more comprehensive predictions than Darwinism does, and even than ID does in cosmology, health science, marriage. Also, many similar predictions with ID, like the Cambrian explosion and different things like that. Of course, even economics relates to creation science. What's the advantage of ID over creation science, especially considering that ID doesn't connect people to a creator, and thousands of studies have shown that following Bible principles is really beneficial in all sorts of areas of life?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's how you define intelligent design and creationism. In my mind, creationism does not make the predictions that intelligent design does, or does not, have the conclusions that intelligent design makes, or all that creationists would believe. Maybe God created life, but the cell was just a little piece of jelly, like was thought back in the 19th century, and did things mysteriously, and you couldn't tell what was going on. Intelligent design, on the other hand, says, well, let's look at life and see if there's any physical explanation for what we find. And when we look at life, it's been discovered that rather than some amorphous piece of jelly, that we find these horrendously complex, elegant systems. Now, in my mind, that's not a prediction of creationism. It wasn't a prediction of anything. It's just an observation, and it's explained by intelligent design.
Actually, it's an inference of creation, because creationists were actually predicting that like junk DNA would actually have function before it was found, and they predicted that a long time before ENCODE came up.
Well, that may be
another case.
I differ with a number of my colleagues on this, but I do not. I'm very skeptical about all claims on junk DNA. It may be the case that creationists predicted that junk DNA would have function. It might be that intelligent design folks predicted that junk DNA had function.
Yeah, both. I believe both did. I have some references that both did.
And yeah, I am an intelligent design proponent, but I don't think intelligent design predicts anything about junk DNA. As far as I know, the DNA of cells of organisms could have junk in it. Maybe it has 90% junk, maybe it has 5% junk, maybe not. I don't know. What I focus on is that there are portions of the DNA that clearly aren't junk. They make elegant stuff, and it is that positive evidence that speaks to design.
Yeah.
Darwinists, talked about junk. Now they say that, oh, wait, Darwinism predicts that there's less junk, and they don't know what to say. In my mind, the argument about junk DNA, everybody is making overblown claims. Creationists, ideists, Darwinists, none of those theories say anything about junk DNA. And what intelligent design focuses on is functional things, like things that are known to have functions, like the bacterial flagellum, like the blood clotting cascade, and so on. That's where we make our arguments. It's easy to make, post hoc or, seemingly you can be led to expect by other things than your basic principles what should happen, and you've got to be careful. And I think the case for junk DNA is kind of shaky all around.
Well, creation science and ID in that area, I think, in my opinion, would have the same kind of predictions, because creation science predicts that God would make things with a purpose and not junk, and they would decay over time sometimes because of sin and different reasons and mutations and whatever. But that's something. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say that may or may not be true. God could have made cells with lots, that were completely full of functional systems. All of the DNA had a purpose, but over time, he designed it to accumulate waste. Well, it's just like things get stored over time. And here we find ourselves in the 20th century. How much waste should we expect to find? Well,
right.
Hard question to answer.
Yeah, the percentage is hard for both sides, not for all sides.
Yeah, that's my view. But I said, a number of ID proponents disagree with me. I'm the odd man out, but that's what I think.
Yeah. Last thing here. There are actually quite a few predictions of creation science. For example, Dr. Hugh Ross has a book, More Than a Theory, and he says in that book that there's about 10 times more creationist predictions in cosmology alone than anything else in history. And he documents them. There are predictions based on direct claims and also inferences, but I think if I remember right, he has like about 80 different predictions in cosmology alone. And there's a whole bunch of I do some work in health areas, and there's like 50 different health principles, and they start in Genesis. And recently, the World Health Organization said that there's like about 38 million people dying per year because of bad health habits, and 3 of the 4 biggest ones that stop deaths are actually in the Bible, talking about reduce alcohol, exercise, and avoid alcohol, or at least reduce some. And then the 4th one is smoking, which is an inference, but not there in the Bible, of course, since it began in the 1600s. But that area is very specific predictions that thousands of such studies have shown are actually quite beneficial. And health, of course, will be connected to if you create life, you want to create the practices that are beneficial for life to continue. That's part of science also.
Sure. Hey, I should read that more often. Maybe I should lay off the whiskey then, and that'd be
would help. The World Health Organization released just last year. Actually, 2 of them, 2 big ones, just happened last year. So. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I admire Dr. Ross too, but astronomy is not my thing. That's his thing.
Yeah.
I try to stick to what I know best.
I'm a little bit a unique person because I believe in a young Earth, but also a very extremely old universe, maybe even up to 1 trillion years old. So based on some interesting evidence I've seen, so really interesting anyway. But anyway, thanks. Nice talking to you, and I'll let someone else talk a little bit now and have questions.
Okay, thanks. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Brian. Let's see. We have a hand raised from a user. I'm not sure who this is. Here we are. User, I'm not sure who you are, but you're on live with Mike Behe.
Hi.
Jonathan, I'm sorry, the picture's so poor. This is Alistair.
I can't hear very well here.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes. I can hear you. Your face is blue, but
yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm sitting in a room with the light behind me. This is Alistair Noble from Scotland. We met some years ago, Mike, when you were over here.
Sure. Yeah, nice to hear from you.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't been in from the beginning, so I did miss a good part of your talk. But I was intrigued by that discussion you had about the legitimacy of inferring design and an intelligent cause, and whether we could establish that, because if the suggestion was if it was something other than human intelligence, we couldn't be sure. But my understanding would be that the design argument would claim that the purposeful arrangement of parts in biology can be seen as an inference to an intelligent cause, which in some way is similar to human intelligence. That would that be a legitimate scientific inference? And if so, what contrary inference could be made? Perhaps that there's some natural law that we haven't yet discovered which mimics human intelligence, but that itself would require some kind of explanation.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's hard. It's hard. These are hard questions, and I'm not a philosopher, but it seems to me that if you talk about mimicking intelligence, I think humans are intelligent, and I think intelligence is it's not something variable. This is intelligence is the ability to understand, to make choices, to plan for the future and other such things. I can't, if there's some other thing meant by intelligence, I'm not sure what that might be. I'm sure there can be greater intelligences. There can even be, I'm a Christian. I think God is intelligent and well beyond the intelligence of humans. But the basic understanding of intelligence, if there's a different way of understanding it, I'm not sure what it is. So if even a superior intelligence makes plans, makes something, arranges events or pieces purposefully, then we as intelligent beings are able to grasp that as well.
Yeah, I think my point just is that I would be very satisfied that an inference from the purposeful arrangement of parts in biology, say, to an intelligent cause seems to me like a very solid scientific inference, and I can't think of any other inference that would make any more sense than that, or indeed at least any sense at all. So I'm a Christian too, but without coming up with any religious proposition, it seems to me that the scientific data is absolutely clear in pointing to an intelligent agent, and that agent clearly has the characteristics of human intelligence, though as a Christian, I guess, it would have to be much more than that. So I wondered if the previous discussion somewhat reduced the clarity of the scientific inference towards an intelligent cause, and I didn't think there was much need for that. I'm not suggesting you did, but the conversation had that kind of inference in it.
Perhaps so. I certainly agree with you. You're preaching to the choir here, but apparently some people don't see it, and I'm not quite sure myself. I don't want to question people, but it seems to me that many people who do question the inference do so because they don't like where the inference is leading. That if the inference really did seem to point to space aliens as the designers of life on Earth, then it would be a whole lot more popular than it is now. I think those who resist, the inference, for the most part, are concerned that it's where it's headed, rather than for the basic argument itself. If that addresses your question.
Absolutely, Mike. Thanks very much. That was very helpful.
Sorry. Is that all from you, Alistair?
Yeah, that's fine, Jonathan. Thank you.
Okay, great. Let's see. We have a hand raised from Bill Cole. Yeah.
Am I on now?
You're on.
Yes.
Michael, can you hear me again? So
Yes.
I figured I'd come back since nobody was in line.
Sure.
Sure. I have got a question. I've been studying biochemistry fairly heavily for about a year and a half now, ever since. And the reason I got into this is I'm a retired electronics executive. I'm now a businessman and private equity businessman. And I was a year and a half ago at my father's memorial service, my son said to me, do you know that we were talking about the probability of life on Earth, and I'm a statistics major, so I was going through this argument, and he said, do you know the chance of a protein forming in nature is 1/10 to the 300th power? And I walked away and said, that doesn't make any sense. There's this theory about all this stuff, how life began in Darwin's theory. And then I started to dig into it, and eventually I got to your book, Darwin's Black Box, and read Tennant Stephen Meyer's book and all the books on the subject. I listened to you debate, the other debate, and the ultimate argument to me, the killer argument for Darwinian theory or any other theory like neutral theory, is that the genome's a sequence. it's the largest mathematical space in the universe. The whole idea that you can mutate through it is almost unbelievable nonsense. And I think that when people start to smell the coffee and realize this, that this is the worst, the neo-Darwinian theory is the worst idea, scientific idea anybody's ever had. And so, you know, one of the things that I wanted to mention to you is that, you know, the way I think about your bacterial flagellum and irreducible complexity is, and I would estimate there's got to be 100 nucleotides involved in that in the DNA of a bacteria, right? Is it at least in the flagellum? Is it?
Yeah, much more than that, sure.
A couple. So let's say it's a couple. Not a couple 100,000, or is there 100,000 nucleotides involved?
Well, that's closer to it, yeah. So I call it 100,000.
Okay, let's say 100,000. So that's 4 to the 100th power of sequential space. That's an imaginary number. That's an infinite number. You know. So how do you arrange such that mechanism can build itself every 20 minutes? Because I think that's what E. coli bacteria can do, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I mean, it's such a bizarre argument to say there's an evolutionary path to this based on random mutation or horizontal gene transfer, whatever you can think of. There really isn't, you know. So that's the way I think about it. That's the way I think about it mathematically. But my question for you is as a biochemist, and I'm studying the cell and really down to the physics level, how are proteins talking to each other? These type of really deep questions, you know, biophysical questions. How much do you think we really understand of a eukaryotic cell at this point?
Oh,
as a percentage, just a swag, because I know I've had a conversation with other scientists on this, but
that's pretty, you know, I would say close to impossible, because, you know, there may be things going on we don't know about.
Yeah.
You know, optimistically call it 1%.
That's the exact number everybody seems to come to.
Is that right? Yeah. Well, that's probably because that's the lowest number they can come up with, and still seems somewhat optimistic, I guess. Give credit to what's happened so far. Yeah, we've got a long way to go. But the nice thing, some people kind of turn that around and say, well, we know so little, so how can you conclude that things are designed? You know, maybe in the future we'll figure out how these things could have occurred without design by some other mechanism. And my response to that, since I made up the question myself, my response to that is that it's not because of what we don't know, it's because of what we do know that we conclude design. Whatever else comes in the future, we see the bacterial flagellum. This is a machine. This is an outboard motor. It's got all these complicated parts. This is how we conclude design. There's nothing in the future that would make this simpler or make this less purposeful than what it is. So we have many interesting things to discover. We might know much less than we know, but we can be confident from what we do know that at least some things in the cell, the molecular machinery of the cell, required at some point purposeful design.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. And I also, if you say design argument what it is and it's an inference, I agree with you, and I think you stated extremely well it's an inference. I also completely agree with you on the junk DNA discussion.
Oh,
we don't know how much is junk, how much is not junk. And when somebody says they're making a scientific prediction, you go into the world of physics where somebody has a mathematical model that's predictive, right? We don't have anything like that here.
Right.
You know? And until we have a mechanism, you know, the next level down from intelligent design, this is how it was done. We can't predict junk DNA or not junk DNA or anything else, right?
Exactly.
You're completely right. I think Stephen Meyer, very interestingly, I was been working on Larry Moran for about 3 months and it was very hard for him to get the concept around the sequential space argument, that this is such big sequential space, you know, your neutral theory is not going to get you through here. Right. And he went away, but I think he then he was at Stephen Meyer's conference. I don't know if you knew there was a conference with Lawrence Krauss up in Canada.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, and what was very, very big in that conference is that, by the way, Larry Moran speaks very highly of you, by the way, even though he thinks you're misguided in your Christianity.
That's very nice. Thank you.
So, but anyway, at that conference, Larry walked away thinking Stephen Meyer had won the debate in a big way, and he mentioned that on his blog.
Even though he was incapacitated with a migraine.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think that made people feel for him, right?
Sympathetic, yeah.
But it was essentially the lock and key argument, which now we all know. One of the arguments I've used in the debate side is, I don't even remember the Art Hunt paper that was a counter to the Doug Axe paper regarding the prevalence of protein folding.
No, I don't know that one. No.
You don't know that. Well, anyway, there's a paper that was written by Doug Axe that said the probability of a protein fold of about 100 amino acids is 1 over 10 to the 7th power.
Yeah, I know Doug's paper, but not the other one.
The fuzziness in that argument is okay. It's not a single fold, but there's multiple ways a protein can fold, right? So you can't just use the straight probability argument, because there's more than one way to fold a protein. So Doug Axe came up with a methodology to handicap, and then Art Hunt came up with a counter argument, which was the probability somewhat less. And then I, on the blogs, came up with the argument, well, even with Hunt's argument, how do you build a bacterial flagellum?
Right.
You get it with this.
There is a lot of distance between less improbable and probable.
So anyway,
okay.
Jonathan, does anybody else in line for a question? Because I'd like to step away.
We do have some questions lined up. How long do you have, Mike?
Hey, Jonathan.
Yes.
Jonathan, I've seen a couple of things pop up on my screen saying that we should take questions from the Q&A box.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. Maybe you can direct me to a question. Mine is pretty full.
I'll read some to you. So Brian asks, imagine that at some future time, the majority of scientists were convinced that the design inference belongs as a proper part of scientific practice. Could you paint a picture of how you think the project and practice of science would look, especially in contrast with how it looks today? This is not meant as any sort of a challenge. I'm simply interested in hearing Dr. Behe's thoughts on what a thoroughly designed, infused scientific community might look like.
Well, I think one of the big projects of science at that point would be to delineate the designs in life. That is, how isolated are designs, how much play is there in a design. For example, in a bacterial flagellum, there are different, subtly different kinds of flagella. Papers recently showed that with microscopy that they can see different types of structures and different organisms that all have the same basic underlying structure, but with some extra decorations, a few extra capacities. Question is, are each of those separate designs, or can one get from the basic flagellum to somewhat more sophisticated flagella, or more complex flagella without purposeful, intelligent input? How much play? Essentially, how much play can non-intelligent processes have in life? It's kind of an offshoot of the question I asked in The Edge of Evolution. My feeling is that design extends much, much deeper into life than even I thought 10, 20 years ago, that things that I thought could arise by random processes nonetheless need design. So one big question that would come up immediately is, how far does design extend into life? I certainly admit, I think everybody has to admit that there is serendipity, there is chance in life, and it can be important in many instances. In some of my talks, I talk about malaria and the mutations in the human genome that have given some resistance to malaria for people who live in those regions of the world. So, for example, the sickle cell mutation, there's a single point mutation in the beta, in a gene for the beta globin. There's no reason to think that that could not have happened by a Darwinian process. That is a random mutation and then selection in that area of the world that's infested by malaria. There's other mutations too. Most of those are degradatory mutations. They break genes, leading to things like thalassemia and other diseases, but nonetheless they're helpful. So it's clear that random processes plus selection, that is Darwin's mechanism, can explain at least some things in life, but there are things that it cannot explain, as I discussed in my books. So somewhere in the middle there, closer to one side or the other, is going to be a rough, and there's no need for it to be utterly linear, but there has to be a rough dividing line between what required intelligence and what didn't. I think that's a big project, and I think it'd be important to find that out for all sorts of reasons. One is, health, human deciding, what capacities pathological organisms have, bacteria and so on. We worry about organisms like HIV or Ebola virus or other things mutating to cause big problems. Well, what is it reasonable to expect them to be able to mutate to, given what we will discover about the limits of evolution? So those are the sorts of things that I can immediately foresee science becoming interested in if an idea of intelligent design is widespread. There might be more things that develop over time, of course. There's, it was hard to predict the future of biological progress, 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. So, of course, a lot of things will be up in the air, but those are at least a couple of the things that I can readily foresee.
Great, thank you. We have an anonymous viewer who asked, is it possible that there was an evolutionary process guided by an intelligent designer in which complex biological structures arose?
Could you read that again? I kind of missed it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it possible that there was an evolutionary process guided by an intelligent designer in which complex biological structures arose?
Okay, so could there have been a process guided by a designer, an evolutionary process? Sure. Yeah, I'm easy about how the design was accomplished, and if there was a process which was guided, the guidance means that it was intelligently designed. That's intelligent input, and as far as I can see, yeah, that certainly could have been the case. The design could have been built into the universe from the beginning. That's fine. All sorts of things. One can imagine all sorts of possibilities. So I have no preference. I mean, I don't have any philosophical preference about how the design could have been instantiated, and I think discovering how it was instantiated is going to be a far more difficult problem than simply perceiving the design for reasons that I said before. I mean, if you look at things like the Sphinx, imagine you were an explorer, you came across the Sphinx for the first time. You would immediately, just upon setting eyes on it, you would immediately know that it was purposely designed, but you might never know, or it might be a long, long time before you figured out who designed it, how they constructed it, and and all those other interesting questions. So yeah, I don't have any particular favorite in how I think the design was carried out. My bottom line is just that there is design, and we can be very confident in coming to that conclusion.
Great, thanks, Mike. We have another question from another Mike who says, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm doing just fine. I'm just getting closer to the speaker.
Okay. Mike, I have two questions. One, what would you say to those who say science is concerned with only naturalistic causes and that we infer ID prematurely only because we do not know yet all there is to know about the naturalistic world, accepting that science already detects ID in fraud, archaeology, forensics, etc.? This wait a while longer argument. Two, there has been a lot of to and fro regarding the type 3 secretion system in the flagellum. What is your take on this subsystem in the flagellum?
Okay, let's see. I'll take that second question first because I've forgotten what the first question was. Okay, so people have pointed out that the type 3 secretion system uses a number of proteins and has a structure similar to a subset of protein or subset of the bacterial flagellum. And the inference is, although nobody really kind of spells it out, I guess, is that maybe this could have been an intermediate on the way to the flagellum, or at the least, maybe this subset of the flagellum has an independent function. And so the idea of irreducible complexity is not correct, because without some of the parts of the flagellum, the subset still has a useful function that some bacteria use, a type 3 secretion system. And that's oftentimes used to inject proteins from one bacteria into another to kill the second bacteria. And that's prey then for the first bacteria. Here's a couple of responses. People in this argument, nobody ever attempts to explain where the type 3 secretory system came from. That is, it's assumed, but it itself is a very complex molecular machine. Nobody, given the type 3 secretory system, tries to explain how that then could develop into a bacterial flagellum by a Darwinian mechanism. All people, in my experience citing this, have just said, well, look, there's this other thing that seems simpler than the first thing, so maybe one has to do with the other. And so in my view, that's simply a kind of a hand-waving kind of thing. It does not propose how either one of them could have developed. It's just saying that there's kind of a simpler or simpler one than the flagellum. The second point is that does this affect the argument of irreducible complexity? And the short answer is no, because the argument for irreducible complexity is that for an IC system, if you take one of the parts away, then the function of the system is no longer works. The system no longer works as it did. The function of the bacterial flagellum is to act as an outboard motor, kind of propelling cells through the liquid. But when it's missing parts, critical parts, it cannot function as an outboard motor. And the type 3 secretion system does not function as an outboard motor. It only functions as this protein pump. That's interesting, and it turns out that when I wrote Darwin's Black Box, no one knew about this other function of the flagellum, that not only does it act as an outboard motor, but the flagellum also has to construct itself. outboard motors, in our experience, don't construct themselves. Intelligent agents have to put them together. But here with this elegant machine, it has the additional severe problem of trying to construct itself. And one facet of that is that proteins of the outer part of the flagellum are pumped out through a hollow interior tube of the base of the flagellum to get to where they need to be for the flagellum to act. And that pumping system is what parts of which are part of the type 3 secretory system. So it turns out that since Darwin's black box was discovered, or was written, we've discovered that the flagellum is much more complex than I wrote about in the book. Not only does it act as an outboard motor, it's also got these spiffy features that help it construct itself, including a protein pump. Darwinists have not explained the first property, the outboard motor. They haven't explained the second one. They haven't explained how the second could give rise to the first. They don't explain where anything has come from. So in my humble estimation, it's pretty brazen to claim that because a system is more complicated than we thought, now somehow Darwinism is vindicated. So that's my answer to the second question. Maybe you can remind me what that first one was.
Let me just very quickly add to that, and then I'll go to the first question. Just very briefly, there's good evidence, I think, from multiple lines of data that suggests that the type 3 secretion system is actually, in fact, a degradation product of the flagellum rather than the ancestor of the flagellum. For example, the type 3 secretion system is taxonomically restricted to a small subset of gram-negative bacteria. Gram-negative bacteria, of course, are bacteria that have a double membrane, an inner and an outer membrane, whereas flagella are much more widely distributed, being found across not only the gram-negative bacteria, but also the gram-positive bacteria, which only have a single outer membrane. So that suggests, again, that the flagellum is probably ancestral to the type 3 secretion system. Moreover, that makes evolutionary sense if that's the case, because there's a selection for motility which precedes the selection for virulence, right? You need to be able to swim through a medium before there's a selective pressure to be able to have to insert toxins or poisons into multicellular organisms. And then moreover, the bacteria that have type 3 secretion systems, such as Yersinia pestis, which is the causal agent of bubonic plague, of course, possess genes for making flagella, even if no flagella are assembled. And so in Yersinia, it doesn't make flagella, but it does make type 3 secretion systems. And it possesses the genes for making flagella, which suggests, again, that the type 3 secretion system is actually an evolutionary byproduct or degradation product of the flagellar system. And also, type 2 secretion systems genes are commonly found in large virulence plasmids, whereas flagellar genes are split into 14 or so operons that are not found in plasmids. And also, the type 2 secretion system genes, when they're found in the chromosomes of bacteria, their GC content, the guanine cytosine content, is typically lower than the GC content of the surrounding genome, which suggests to biologists a foreign origin. And also there's good reason to think that the type 3 secretion system is itself iridescent complex. In fact, there was a study published in 2001 by Sukhan et al., I believe, which basically they looked at, they examined the effect of loss of function mutations in various type 3 secretion associated genes in Salmonella. And the effect of these loss of function mutations on the assembly of this needle complex. And they found that many of the type 3 secretion system components are actually required for the system's functioning. And so it seems that the type 3 secretion system is itself iridescently complex. And so there's a number of real challenges to that model. And also, if you look at the flagellar apparatus, is one thing, even going from a type 3 secretion system, how do you construct the assembly apparatus to produce a flagellum, right? Because, for example, the shooting through the the type 3 export apparatus in the flagellum are the flagellum monomers that produce the filament or the propeller of the structure. Now, these actually, they have to pass through a very narrow 2 nanometer diameter tube or channel in order to reach the end of the propeller. And they have to actually be unfolded for insertion into the channel and then subsequently refolded at the distal growing end. And so you have this capping protein called flying D, which basically acts as a folding chamber as the flagellum monomers are shot through. And flying D is known experimentally to be absolutely critical and essential for flagellar assembly. If you knock out flying D, the flagellum monomers are simply lost into the medium. So that's a significant challenge. And
it sounds like you've read up on this.
But it's just, the flag J actually has to, and flag D, by the way, the filament capping protein actually has no known homologs outside the flagellum. It is absolutely critical. And the same is true of flag J. And flag J acts as basically a hydrolyzing, it has a hydrolyzing domain or aromatase activity, and this other domain has binding affinity for rod proteins. And so basically it punctures a hole through the outer membrane to allow rod penetration. And that's critical in gram-negative bacteria, which have the double membrane.
Yeah.
And then there's the MS and LP rings, which are essential in gram-negative bacteria. Again, the flagella are very diverse, and so what's essential in one system might not be essential in another. But if something is essential in a bacterium with 2 membranes, and that is in itself an irreducibly complex system for this sort of bacteria, if you will.
Yeah, it's fascinating just to realize that all of those considerations that you list are really critical for its functioning, and yet the only response from the other side has been to say, look, here's the type 3 secretory system. There have been no experimental experiments testing whether any of those things, any of the least features of such a system could have accumulated by random mutation and selection. So the point is that Darwinian claims exceed their data by light years at best. Another point, just to make from your summary, is that the type 3 system seems to be a degradation product of the flagellum, and while that might be an evolutionary pathway, that is certainly not what Darwinism expects. To have a very complex system, to postulate a complex system which can degrade to give you another complex system. Well, that's not what you think of when you think of Darwin's theory. It's not very explanatory.
So it's also interesting, if you have a type 3 secretion system or something performing the function of like a type 3 secretion system, its purpose is to inject poisons into multicellular organisms, what use would it be to suddenly start expressing flagellum proteins and displaying them to the macrophages and producing a potent cytokine response? And so that also seems to me to be a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also producing the temporal expression of the relevant genes, right? How do you build you need the hook basal body apparatus before you start producing the propeller structure? And so you tightly coordinated assembly apparatus in order to put that in place.
That's right. Everywhere you look, there's this purposeful arrangement of parts. I love that phrase. And there are no explanations for any of that stuff. And yet the interesting thing in our world is that the folks who claim that all of that arose by random processes plus selection are given the presumption that they're correct based on a total of no evidence and in the teeth of all of this extraordinary functional complexity. Anyway, Jonathan, if it's okay, I'll stay for another 5 minutes, and then I better get moving.
Yeah, I understand. So let me read the first of the questions that from Mike that you forgot. The question is, what would you say to those who say science is concerned with only naturalistic causes and that we infer ID prematurely only because we do not know yet all there is to know about the naturalistic world, accepting that science is that science already detects ID in fraud, archaeology, forensics, etc.
Yeah, I think science is concerned with physical effects in our world. I don't want to get into the causes. We can determine physical effects and infer them to a cause way before we understand the nature of a cause. For example, historically, Isaac Newton, of course, postulated came up with a theory of gravity and described that and could predict and do all sorts of science. And he famously said that he was not even going to try to guess what gravity was or how it acted. And we still don't know. You know, hundreds of years later, we still really don't know what exactly gravity is, how all of this stuff works. So not knowing the cause, or we don't have a good physical understanding of gravity, let alone, less familiar things. A more modern example is the Big Bang Theory. Physicists have inferred from the motion of the galaxies and other things that the entire universe began in a singular event, a long, long time ago, and expanded from there, blew up from there. Well, we haven't the foggiest idea what could cause a universe to pop into existence. We have no explanation. There's speculation, certainly, but we have no explanation for how such a thing could happen. So I see intelligent design in the same framework, that we see the effects of design in our world, just like we see gravity acting in our world, we see the effects of intelligent design in our world. We know how intelligence works in our common experience. And so from that, we're justified in thinking that life too required design. Exactly how that was affected, what is the intelligence behind life, and so on. Those are other very interesting questions, which maybe future work can shed some light on, but that does not restrict our ability to come to a conclusion of design for life any more than a lack of a theory for exactly what gravity is stopped Newton from concluding that there was such a thing and that it acted in the world.
Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, one more I'll take, sure.
Okay, Chase wants to know, he says, would the speaker mind briefly discussing the idea of the edge of evolution, especially with regard to the probability of incurring multiple mutations as the current state of this issue, and what might be the most important questions for ID researchers to pursue on this topic?
Say that again.
Okay. Would the speaker mind briefly discussing the idea of the edge of evolution, especially with regard to the probability of incurring multiple mutations, the current state of this issue, and what might be the most important questions for ID researchers to pursue on this topic?
Okay, yeah, okay. The idea of the edge of evolution is really pretty a simple one, and that is that some features of life, or most features of life maybe, required purposeful design, but that we live in the world, and accidents can happen in the world. Things can fall on us, we can be exposed to chemicals, birth defects can happen, mutations can happen, and there is such a thing as, a mutation that helps an organism survive. So given that there are some aspects of life which can be explained by random mutation and natural selection, and that but nonetheless, some things are beyond explanation for that. That is the molecular machinery of the cell and other things that I discussed in my books. Kind of where's the dividing line between what can evolve by a Darwinian type process or other unintelligent process and what required purposeful design. I call that the edge of evolution because it's alliterative and so it's catchy, and it also kind of explains the problem. So again, for example, you know, some anti-malaria mutations, it can certainly be explained by just random changes plus natural selection, but things like the blood clotting cascade or intracellular transport can't. And in the edge of evolution, I said a big difference is when you require more than one change at a time to have a selectable effect. That is, if you need just one mutation and the mutation helps an organism survive, then Darwin's mechanism of mutation plus selection is the answer. That can explain things. So if, for example, an amino acid can change in hemoglobin to give you sickle cell hemoglobin, and that helps an organism survive in a malarial region, that can easily be explained by Darwinian processes. But if you need two coordinated mutations before you have a selectable effect, then there's a quantum leap in difficulty or in improbability. And it's when you need multiple mutations that you start to suspect that design is involved. In the edge of evolution, I said, well, you know, even with multiple mutations, you know, you don't automatically ascribe them to design. And I talked about the development of resistance to the drug chloroquine by the malarial parasite, and showed that, in fact, it's very difficult for malaria to develop resistance to chloroquine. It's been known for a long time. And I speculated in Edge of Evolution, and that's recently been confirmed, that in fact two different amino acid mutations are needed in one particular protein before there is resistance to chloroquine in the organism. And I showed that that required an astronomical number of malarial cells for that to occur, and argued that something like that could not happen, or certainly would not be expected to happen, in larger organisms like humans or mammals, most mammals, and so on. It could only happen in the malarial parasite because it's a single-celled organism and occurs in astronomical numbers on the Earth. So the point is that when at the molecular level, when you need multiple mutations to get a selectable effect for visible organisms that we can see, you know, birds, fish, people, that's likely to be unavailable to an undirected evolutionary process. And we can put a rough cutoff around that area or a little bit above, just to make sure that we don't incorrectly ascribe to designs to things that weren't designed. Mm-hmm. And then I argued that, you know, protein binding sites and other things likely fit that criteria, and that design extended very deeply into life. So I think that's the summary that Jim was looking for, I guess. Otherwise, I just have to read my book over the internet here.
Do you remember the 2008 paper that appeared in Journal of Genetics by Jurt and Schmidt, the two mathematicians who sought to repeat the edge of evolution? I thought that was funny because basically they say Behe was wrong. It wouldn't take as long as Behe thinks it would for a two-step coordinated mutation in a transcription factor binding site. It would, in a human lineage, affect a population size of 20,000 individuals per generation on average. In a human lineage, it would only take 216 million years for this two-step.
They said, "Oops, wait a second." Yeah, that was great. They kind of stepped in it there, and they tried to cover it up, saying, "Well, let's expand the area that, you know, might suffer these mutations." But the broader point is that even with these things, is that if you need two mutations if one doesn't do anything, but you need the second one to come in to have some effect, some beneficial effect, then the difficulty has gone up exponentially. It may still kind of be doable if you've got extremely large population sizes, but in general, it doesn't. So that kind of confirms our intuition that when you need a purposeful arrangement of parts, that points strongly to design.
Particularly in higher life forms like metazoans, that are animals that have, that have much lower mutation rates than, say, a bacterial cell would or a viral cell would. I like the example that Rick Sternberg gives of the whales going from evolving as terrestrial mammals, where the testes of these whales, these cetacea, are actually found inside the body right next to the muscles generating heat during swimming. And so they have to actively cool down the gland in a manner akin to a modern refrigeration system by basically shunning cool blood from the tail flukes then to a nexus of arteries and veins that dissipates heat from the gland. And so while the testes are moving about in the water column, the testes remain below core body temperature because the testes are cooled literally they're bathed in cool blood. And so in mammals, when the testes fail to descend, you get sterility, which obviously is an evolutionary dead end. And so the genes have to occur together. You have to get the testes inside the body into the intra-abdominal cavity, and you need to get this elaborate kind of Cartesian exchange system. And according to Rick's calculations, just assuming that 2 mutations were necessary to generate that transition, that's an outrageously generous assumption, you would require 43.3 million years for that to occur, given the average breeding population sizes of terrestrial mammals. And that's just one of the changes. You also have to reorient the fetus. You have to modify the mammary glands. You have to have a special lung surfactant, and on and on. So the Pachycetus to Dorudon transition is less than 9 million years. 9 million years is the most generous of assumptions. And so it's the entire transition taking place in less than 9 million years, and probably far less than that, when you would require many-fold more than that, given what's required based on the standard equations of population genetics. It seems to be plausible.
Yeah, that's exactly. So you get these major transitions in the blink of a geological eye, and you also have other species that take tens of millions of years to grow a larger beak, or have some extremely minor change. And so yeah, if you need more than one change at a time, Darwinian evolution is pretty much shut down.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Dr. Behe. It's been a real pleasure to have you on with us today.
Okay, yeah, I greatly enjoyed being on, and hey, this is a fun site. I'm going to have to come back as an audience participant for the upcoming talks, I think.
Yeah, we have some talks in the future on ID-related topics. We have, I think it's in July, if I'm not mistaken, we have Dr. Gunter Betchley, who's actually in the audience today. He's going to talk to us about evidence for how the fossil record is evidence for common descent and against Darwinian evolution, which will be fascinating. And we also have Zachary Moore, who's also in the audience. You talked to him earlier, coming to talk to us about the molecular evidence for evolution. So those will be interesting, and hopefully we can get some more ID people up giving talks as well.
Great. All right, sign me up.
All right.
Okay. Thanks very much. I got some domestic things to do now, and so thanks again for having me.
Thanks. Good to have you.
Okay. Bye-bye, folks.
Take care. Bye, Mike.